What made a lonely cowboy whisper, "Every breath you take belongs to me," to a woman he'd barely known? Snow whipped across the mountain trail as Naomi's knees slammed into the frozen ground. Eli lay trapped beneath his fallen horse, his breath coming in short, painful bursts, while loose rocks rattled down the hillside. Her fingers were numb, the wind cut through her coat, and still she reached for him instead of running. Then he looked into her eyes and said 5 words that made her stop cold. What those words truly meant would change far more than either of them understood. If stories like this stay with you, come along for the journey. Snow had been falling over Red Cedar Basin since before dawn, covering wagon tracks almost as quickly as they appeared. By late afternoon, the stagecoach from Sheridan rolled into the small station wrapped in white, its horses breathing hard as frost clung to their manes. Only one passenger stepped down. Naomi Brooks tightened her worn wool shawl and lifted a canvas bag that held everything she owned. Inside were 2 dresses, a Bible with her mother's name written on the first page, a small tin comb, and a folded letter promising honest work as a housekeeper for a respectable family in Wyoming Territory. She looked around the station, searching every face. The man who had signed the letter finally raised a hand. "You Naomi Brooks?" "Yes, sir." He walked closer, studying her in silence. His eyes lingered only a moment before his expression hardened. "I wasn't told." He stopped. Naomi waited. "I wasn't told you were colored." The wind swept between them, carrying loose snow across the platform. "I can work," she said quietly. "I came all the way from Missouri." He glanced toward the people watching from the general store porch. "I've changed my mind." He turned without another word. "Sir?" He kept walking. "My payment," she called after him. "The stage fare took everything I had." His shoulders never slowed. By the time he disappeared into the drifting snow, the letter in Naomi's hand had become little more than damp paper trembling against her fingers. The station master locked the freight office. The blacksmith crossed the street. One by one, windows filled with warm lantern light while the platform grew empty, except for Naomi. She lowered herself onto a weathered bench beneath the station roof. Snow still drifted through the open sides, settling across her boots. Her stomach tightened. She had not eaten since sunrise. Across the muddy street, laughter spilled from the doorway of Hank Dillard's boarding house. A few men wandered outside carrying coffee mugs that smelled more of whiskey than coffee. One of them nudged another. "Looks like someone's been left behind." Another chuckled. "Won't last the night out here." Naomi kept her eyes on the frozen ground. She had learned long ago that silence sometimes passed faster than argument. Boots scraped across packed snow. One of the men stopped a few feet away. "You need someplace warm?" His smile never reached his eyes. Naomi gripped the strap of her bag. "I'm waiting." "For who?" She didn't answer. The man leaned a little closer. "There ain't nobody coming." Before another word could leave his mouth, a different sound drifted through the storm. Small sleigh bells. Every head turned. A gray horse pulled a sturdy sleigh toward the station. Snow coated its harness, and a lantern swung beneath the front rail. The driver brought the horse to a calm stop. He climbed down without hurry, tall, broad shoulders, a dark canvas coat dusted white. His hat shadowed a face weathered by years of mountain wind. Beside him sat a little girl bundled beneath buffalo blankets, her knitted cap nearly covering her eyes. The man looked once at the stranger standing over Naomi. "You finished?" His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The drunken smile faded. "We're just talking." It sounded different. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the man beside Naomi muttered under his breath, turned away, and wandered back toward the boarding house. The others followed. The station fell quiet again, except for the wind. The cowboy stepped closer. "You heading somewhere?" Naomi looked at the abandoned letter in her hand before answering. "I thought I was." His eyes dropped briefly to the paper, then to the small bag at her feet. "No family here?" She shook her head. "No money?" Another small shake. The little girl in the sleigh coughed softly. The cowboy removed his heavy coat. Before Naomi could protest, he settled it across her shoulders. Warmth settled around her like something she had almost forgotten. "I can't take this." "You can until we get home." Home. The word caught somewhere deep inside her. The little girl shifted beneath the blankets. The cowboy gently lifted her into his arms before stepping closer again. "Hold her a minute." Naomi blinked. "What?" "So I can tie down the feed sacks." He placed the child carefully into Naomi's lap. The little girl looked no older than 6. Quiet. Thin. She studied Naomi with solemn gray eyes before slowly resting her head against Naomi's shoulder, as though she had known her much longer than a few seconds. Naomi hesitated. Then, almost without thinking, she wrapped the coat around the child. The little girl's breathing slowed. "So warm," she whispered. Naomi closed her eyes for only a second. No one had leaned against her like that in years. The cowboy secured the cargo behind the sleigh, then returned. "My name's Eli Mercer." She looked up. "Naomi Brooks." He gave one short nod. "I've got room." She searched his face, trying to understand why a stranger would offer what no one else had. "There'll be work." "I don't mind work. There'll be rules." "I understand." He glanced toward the darkening sky. "We should leave before the pass freezes over." Naomi climbed carefully into the sleigh. Emma remained tucked beside her, still wrapped in the oversized coat. The horse started forward. No one spoke. The runners whispered over packed snow. Pine trees leaned beneath fresh powder. The road climbed slowly into the foothills of the Bighorn Mountains, where the world narrowed into white silence broken only by wind moving through cedar branches. After nearly an hour, the valley opened. A split-rail fence emerged from the storm. Beyond it stood a weathered barn, a windmill creaking in slow circles, and a log house with warm light glowing behind frosted windows. Farther back, behind the stable, Naomi noticed something unexpected. A smaller cabin. Smoke no longer rose from its chimney, yet fresh footprints surrounded the porch. The snow had been shoveled. A lantern already burned beside the door. Someone had stacked dry firewood beneath the eaves. Someone had swept the steps. It looked ready, not abandoned. Ready. Eli noticed where she was looking. "That cabin's yours." Naomi stared. "You prepared it. I keep it usable." "For travelers?" He didn't answer immediately. His eyes rested on the little cabin for a brief moment before drifting away. "I thought someone might need it someday." The sleigh rolled through the ranch gate. Naomi looked once more at the waiting cabin, its single lantern glowing against the endless Wyoming snow. For the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, she wondered whether fate had closed one door only to quietly open another. Eli carried a lantern across the yard without asking her to follow. She did. The little cabin stood behind the stable, sheltered from the north wind by a line of old cedar trees. Its roof had been patched with fresh pine shingles. A split stack of dry firewood rested beneath the porch overhang, covered with canvas to keep it dry. Eli pushed open the door. The room was simple. A narrow iron stove, a rope bed with 2 thick quilts folded neatly across it, a washstand with a blue enamel basin, a wooden peg on the wall. Nothing more. There are matches beside the stove, he said. Water comes from the hand pump behind the barn. Naomi set her bag beside the bed. You've done all this already. I keep it ready. He paused as if considering whether to explain further. Then he simply nodded once. Breakfast is at 6. The door closed quietly behind him. For several moments she stood listening. Only the wind. Only the soft crackle of kindling catching inside the stove. She knelt to warm her hands. The cabin smelled of cedar boards and clean ashes instead of neglect. It felt strange to sleep inside 4 solid walls after so many nights spent wondering where the next roof might be. She unfolded her mother's Bible before blowing out the lantern. "Thank you," she whispered. She wasn't sure whether she meant the prayer for God or for the quiet cowboy who had asked for nothing in return. Morning arrived with pale sunlight spilling over the frozen valley. A rooster crowed somewhere beyond the barn. Naomi buttoned her faded brown dress, wrapped a wool scarf around her neck, and stepped into the sharp morning air. Hoofprints crossed the yard. Smoke drifted lazily from the main chimney. Inside the stable, Eli was already brushing down a chestnut mare. He glanced toward Naomi. The pump freezes after sunrise. She understood. He wasn't making conversation. He was reminding her before the water turned to ice. She filled 2 buckets and carried them back before her fingers lost feeling. When she entered the ranch house for breakfast, Emma was already sitting at the table. The little girl stared at a bowl of oatmeal without touching it. Eli poured coffee into a thick stoneware mug. He placed another empty mug beside Naomi. No words, just the mug. She quietly filled it from the kettle. Breakfast passed beneath the ticking of an old wall clock. Emma never spoke. Eli barely did. Only spoons touching bowls broke the silence. After the meal, Naomi noticed a torn curtain hanging crooked beside the front window. Without asking, she found a sewing basket tucked beneath a cabinet. The basket held waxed thread, worn needles, and scraps of flour sack cloth carefully folded by size. She stitched the tear before beginning the dishes. Later, she swept the front porch. Then she gathered scattered harness straps from beside the stable and rubbed saddle leather with tallow until it softened again. No one had assigned those chores. She simply couldn't ignore things left unfinished. Near noon, she heard tiny footsteps behind her. Emma stood holding a dented tin bucket nearly as large as herself. Naomi smiled gently. "Need help?" The little girl hesitated. Then she held out the bucket. Together they scattered cracked corn across the chicken yard. Emma still said nothing, but she stayed beside Naomi. The next morning, the little girl appeared again, this time carrying 2 eggs. On the 3rd morning, she followed Naomi into the kitchen, while cornbread baked inside a cast-iron oven. Naomi showed her how to stir batter slowly instead of fast. Emma watched every movement. When flour dust landed across Naomi's nose, the little girl's lips twitched. Not quite a smile. Almost. Outside, Eli paused while carrying a bundle of fence posts. Through the kitchen window, he saw Emma standing closer to Naomi than she had stood to anyone in months. He looked away before either of them noticed. The days settled into a quiet rhythm. At dawn, Eli rode the pasture fences. Naomi swept the porch before breakfast. Emma carried kindling 1 armful at a time. Every morning, Naomi found fresh water already heating on the stove before she arrived. Every evening, another stack of split cedar appeared beside her cabin door. No one claimed credit. Neither of them needed to. A week later, Eli hitched the wagon. "We need seed potatoes," he said. "The mercantile?" He nodded. Emma climbed between them on the wooden seat. The road into Red Cedar crossed a frozen creek before winding past the church blacksmith shop. The town looked smaller beneath winter skies. Inside the general store, Naomi examined sacks of bean seed while Eli counted coins beside the counter. The clerk wrote each purchase carefully onto a receipt before folding it beneath a brass paperweight. Near the flour barrels, two women lowered their voices. She must be the woman staying out at Mercer Ranch. I heard she's only temporary. Naomi pretended not to hear. As they stepped outside carrying supplies, another rancher gave Eli a knowing grin. Didn't expect you to bring company home. Eli tightened the wagon straps. He said nothing. The silence stretched longer than the remarks themselves. Naomi climbed into the wagon without looking at him. The ride home felt colder than the ride into town. That evening, she unpacked the seed potatoes into the root cellar. Eli carried feed to the horses. Neither spoke. After supper, Naomi returned to the little cabin. She folded her dresses carefully into her canvas bag, then her Bible, then the tin comb. She wrapped the worn letter inside the shawl she had arrived with. Perhaps she had mistaken kindness for welcome. Perhaps there was a difference. Outside, the porch boards creaked. She quickly tied the bag shut. The footsteps passed without stopping. An hour later, the cabin grew quiet again. Just before dawn, Naomi reached for her boots beneath the bed. Her hand touched empty floorboards. She checked beneath the chair, beside the stove, under the blanket. Nothing. Someone had moved them. She opened the door. Fresh little footprints led away through the thin layer of overnight snow. Tiny footprints, no larger than Emma's. Naomi followed them across the fresh snow until they disappeared behind the woodshed. Emma sat on an old chopping block with her knees tucked beneath her coat. Naomi's boots rested beside her, carefully hidden under a folded horse blanket. The little girl lowered her eyes. I didn't want you to leave. The words came so softly they almost disappeared into the cold morning air. Naomi knelt in front of her. You knew? Emma nodded. I heard your bag. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Naomi slipped the boots back on, then reached out and gently brushed a snowflake from the child's mitten. I'm still here. Emma didn't smile. She simply reached for Naomi's hand. It lasted only a second before she hurried back toward the house. That afternoon, the wind changed. Dark clouds gathered above the Bighorn Mountains, swallowing the pale winter sun. Old Mrs. Eleanor Finch stopped her wagon at the ranch gate on her way home from town. Storm's coming, she warned Eli. The North Pass won't stay open long. Eli thanked her and helped unload the sack of flour she insisted Naomi should have. Mrs. Finch studied Naomi for a moment before climbing back into her wagon. You've brought life back to this place, she said quietly. Then she drove away. The words stayed with Naomi long after the wagon disappeared. That night she couldn't sleep. The silence inside the little cabin felt different now. Warmer, which frightened her more than the cold ever had. Just before first light, she packed her canvas bag once again. This time Emma's boots could not stop her. She left them neatly beside the bed. Outside, the ranch slept beneath fresh snow. Naomi crossed the yard without looking back. She had almost reached the cedar fence when she heard the stable door slam open. Eli! One of the ranch hands from a neighboring spread had ridden in before dawn with news of the storm. Eli stepped outside, pulling on his gloves. He looked toward the empty cabin, the open door, then toward the fresh footprints leading away from the ranch. His jaw tightened. Without another word, he saddled his gray gelding. Snow had already begun falling again by the time he reached the mountain trail. Ahead, Naomi struggled through drifts that reached almost to her knees. The wind pushed harder with every step. She heard hoofbeats behind her. She turned only once. Eli, go back. You'll never make the pass. I can't stay. You don't have to earn a place every single day. She looked away. I already know what happens when people decide I'm too much trouble. Before Eli could answer, a sharp crack echoed across the ridge. Both of them looked uphill, A loose slab of frozen rock broke free. The horse reared. "Eli!" The gelding slipped sideways on the icy trail. Eli hit the ground hard. One boot remained trapped beneath the saddle as the frightened horse struggled against the reins. Naomi ran. The wind stung her face until tears froze at the corners of her eyes. "Hold still." She dropped to her knees, forcing the leather stirrup free before the horse could panic again. Eli gritted his teeth as she pulled him clear. His right leg buckled the moment he tried to stand. "I'll manage." "No," she said firmly. "You won't." She looked around through the blowing snow. Half hidden among the pines stood an abandoned trapper's cabin, little more than a roof and 4 leaning walls. It was their only chance. One slow step at a time, Naomi supported Eli's weight across the frozen clearing. By the time they reached shelter, both of them were soaked with melting snow. Naomi coaxed a fire to life using dry cedar kindling left inside an old coffee tin. She wrapped Eli's leg with clean strips torn from the lining of her petticoat, after finding only a bad sprain instead of broken bone. Steam slowly rose from their damp coats. For a while they listened only to the fire. Finally Eli spoke. "I should have said something in town." Naomi kept feeding small sticks into the flames. "I heard every word." "I know. You said nothing." He nodded once. "If I'd challenged them in front of everyone, they'd have come after you harder." She stared into the fire. "I thought your silence meant you agreed. It meant I was afraid." She looked at him for the first time. "Afraid? I've buried enough people." The words hung quietly between them. "I didn't want to see them turn you into another reason someone never came home." Naomi lowered her eyes. Outside, the wind began to weaken. By late afternoon, they started back toward the ranch together. Eli leaned on a cut pine branch Naomi had shaped into a walking staff. The chimney finally came into view just before sunset. Relief barely had time to settle before another sound broke the quiet. Hooves. 3 riders waited beside the front gate. At their center sat Hank Dillard. His gloves rested casually across the saddle horn. His smile never reached his eyes. "I've been looking for someone." His gaze settled on Naomi. "You've had something of mine for quite a while." Naomi's fingers tightened around the walking staff. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh." Hank reached inside his coat and unfolded a sheet of paper. "I think you do." He looked directly at Eli. "That woman stole a ranch ledger." He folded the paper again. "And if that book ever reaches the wrong hands," his smile widened, "half this town will lose everything." The words settled over the ranch yard like another storm. Eli rested one hand on the split-rail fence to steady his injured leg. His other hand never left the walking stick Naomi had cut for him in the mountains. "I don't answer for rumors," he said evenly. Hank shrugged. "Then ask her." His eyes shifted toward Naomi. "You've got 3 days." He tipped his hat, turned his horse, and rode away with the 2 men behind him. The sound of hooves faded down the frozen road until only the wind remained. Neither Eli nor Naomi spoke. Emma opened the front door just enough to peek outside. "You came back." Naomi forced a small smile. "We did." Emma ran across the porch and wrapped both arms around Naomi's waist before stepping back to look at Eli's leg. "Papa? I'll be fine." He wasn't. By morning, the swelling had climbed from his ankle to his knee. Naomi heated water in the black iron kettle and carried it to the kitchen table. She found clean linen in the cupboard, mixed crushed comfrey with warm tallow, the way her mother once had, and wrapped the strained muscles with careful hands. Eli watched without interrupting. "You've done this before. My mother treated folks who couldn't afford the doctor." He nodded once. It shows. That was the closest thing to praise she had heard from him. Outside, winter refused to loosen its grip. A hard wind rattled the stable doors. Someone cut the rope on the south pasture gate during the night. 3 mares wandered nearly a mile before Eli and Naomi brought them home together. The next evening, 2 sacks of feed were found slashed open. Nothing was stolen. Someone simply wanted them to know they had been there. Eli repaired the damage without complaint. Naomi swept spilled grain into a bucket, so none would go to waste. Life at the ranch became quieter, yet heavier. Every sound after sunset made Emma glance toward the windows. One afternoon, Naomi found a folded receipt tucked beneath the coffee grinder on the kitchen shelf. It listed oats, lamp oil, flour, and medicine purchased nearly 2 years earlier. Across the bottom, written in neat handwriting, were the words, "Paid in full." Grace Mercer. Naomi traced the faded ink with one finger before carefully returning the paper exactly where she had found it. She understood now. Nothing inside this house had been forgotten. Everything had simply been left untouched. 3 nights later, rain fell before the temperature dropped. By midnight, the rain had turned to sleet. By dawn, every fence post glittered beneath a sheet of ice. Emma woke coughing. At first it sounded small. By afternoon, she struggled to catch her breath between each cough. Eli saddled his horse. "I'll ride to Dr. Holloway." Naomi opened the front door. Snow was already blowing sideways across the yard. The north road had vanished beneath fresh drifts. "You won't make the creek crossing," she said quietly. He looked beyond her. She was right. The trail was gone. Emma shivered beneath 3 quilts. Naomi carried another kettle to the stove. "Help me move the rocking chair closer to the fire." Eli obeyed without asking why. She brewed willow bark, onion, honey, and peppermint into a steaming cup, cooling each spoonful before letting Emma swallow it. Every hour she changed the damp cloth resting across the little girl's forehead. Every hour she rubbed warmth back into Emma's cold hands. Night settled over Red Cedar Basin. The storm pressed against the cabin walls. Eli sat beside the window, coffee growing cold in his mug. He had never felt so helpless. Near midnight, he rose to take Naomi's place. "You need sleep." She shook her head. "I'm staying. You've been awake since yesterday." So has she. He looked toward Emma, then back at Naomi. There was no argument left. Only trust. The fire burned low. Naomi fed another cedar log into the stove. She began humming a hymn so softly that it almost blended with the wind outside. Emma's breathing slowly became steadier. Just before sunrise, the fever finally broke. The little girl's eyes fluttered open. She looked from Eli to Naomi. Then she reached toward Naomi with both hands. "Mama." The room became perfectly still. Naomi froze. The damp cloth slipped from her fingers into the basin below. Eli lowered his head. No one corrected the child. No one needed to. Emma fell asleep again with her small hand wrapped around Naomi's sleeve. Late that evening, after Emma was resting comfortably in bed, Eli sat beside the kitchen table while Naomi replaced the bandage around his shoulder, where the harness buckle had torn through his coat during the fall in the mountains. She worked carefully. Fresh linen, clean water, a strip of cloth tied with steady fingers. When she finished, she started to pull away. Eli gently caught her hand. She looked up. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Every breath you take belongs to me." She searched his face, uncertain. He continued, "Because I'll spend the rest of my life making sure no one steals it again." Her eyes filled before she realized they had. He wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't claiming her. He was making a promise. Naomi lifted her free hand, and rested it lightly against his weathered cheek. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, they leaned toward one another. Their first kiss was quiet, gentle, like something both had waited years to believe was still possible. Outside, the storm finally passed. Inside, the cabin no longer felt empty. The peace lasted only until the next morning. Hoofbeats echoed through the frozen yard. Sheriff Amos Granger stepped down from his horse, brushed snow from his coat, and removed a folded legal notice from inside his saddlebag. His expression said everything before he spoke. Naomi Brooks. He held out the document. You're ordered to appear before the Red Cedar Town Council on a charge of theft. The paper fluttered slightly in the cold wind. Naomi accepted it without a word. Sheriff Amos Granger removed his hat. I don't make the accusations, he said quietly. I only carry them. Eli stepped forward. Who signed it? Hank Dillard. Neither man spoke after that. The sheriff looked once toward Emma, who stood inside the doorway wrapped in a blanket, then climbed back onto his horse. The hearing is Saturday morning. Reverend Pike will be there. By the time he rode away, fresh snow had already begun to cover the tracks. Saturday came gray and still. The bell above the little church in Red Cedar rang only once. People filled the wooden pews long before the meeting began. Ranchers, storekeepers, widows, rail hands. Most had heard Hank's version of the story. Very few had heard Naomi's. She walked into the church beside Eli. Emma held Naomi's hand so tightly that her little fingers turned white. Whispers drifted through the room, then faded as Reverend Samuel Pike stood. We're here to hear the truth, he said. Nothing more. Hank rose first. His coat was neatly brushed. His boots shined. He laid a ledger cover on the table. The missing account book disappeared the same week this woman left my boarding house. He pointed toward Naomi. She stole records belonging to honest businessmen. A murmur spread across the room. Hank continued. She has no right to stand here pretending innocence. Naomi did not answer immediately. Instead, she reached into the lining of her old canvas bag. Every eye followed the movement. From beneath a carefully stitched seam, she drew out a weathered leather ledger wrapped in cloth. She laid it gently on the table. I didn't steal it. The church grew silent. I kept it. Hank's smile disappeared. Naomi untied the cloth. Several folded receipts slipped free. Bills of sale, land agreements, payment records. Each page carried Hank Dillard's handwriting. Each page showed livestock sold twice, money collected but never delivered, small ranches taken from widows after debts that had already been paid. Naomi spoke calmly. The man who hired me asked me to burn this book. She looked directly at Hank. I couldn't. Mrs. Eleanor Finch slowly stood from the second pew. I know that handwriting. She walked forward without hesitation. My husband sold 20 head of cattle through Hank 6 years ago. She turned the pages. The numbers never matched. Another rancher stepped forward. So did mine. Then another. One by one, old doubts found proof. Sheriff Amos accepted the ledger and examined the signatures. He closed the cover carefully. Hank Dillard. His voice carried through the little church. You're under arrest for fraud, theft, and falsifying property records. For the first time anyone in Red Cedar could remember, Hank had nothing to say. He looked around the room as if expecting someone to defend him. No one did. The sheriff placed a hand on his shoulder. Hank walked out without another word. The church remained quiet long after the door closed. Reverend Pike looked toward Naomi. You carried this all this time? She nodded. I was waiting for the day someone would finally ask for the truth. Outside, Winter sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in days. People stepped aside as Naomi left the church, not because they feared her, because they were making room. Mrs. Finch reached her first. She pressed a warm loaf of bread into Naomi's hands. "You've earned your place here." Others followed with quiet nods. No speeches, no applause, just simple respect. Eli stood beside her the entire time. He never answered for her. He never stepped in front of her. He simply stayed close enough that she never had to wonder whether she stood alone. They returned to the ranch before sunset. The old wooden sign beside the entrance leaned slightly from years of Wyoming wind. Mercer Ranch. Eli carried a hammer beneath one arm. Without explanation, he loosened the rusty nails and lifted the sign away. Emma watched from the wagon. Naomi stood beside the fence. From the bed of the wagon, Eli picked up another board. Fresh cedar, new paint. He fastened it carefully across the gate. Mercer Family Ranch. He stepped back to straighten it. Naomi looked at the words for a long time. "You changed it. I finished it." He looked at her. It wasn't complete before. Emma ran across the yard and threw her arms around Naomi. "We're home." Naomi knelt and held her close. For the first time since arriving in Wyoming, she lifted her head without hesitation. Spring came slowly to Red Cedar Basin. Snowmelt filled the creek. Green grass returned to the valley floor. Neighbors stopped by with broken harnesses, sick calves, or aching hands, and Naomi helped however she could using the remedies her mother had taught her. Children waved when she passed the mercantile. Mrs. Finch always saved a warm pie for Emma. The ranch no longer echoed with silence. One summer evening, the three of them sat on the front porch watching the last sunlight settle across the Bighorn Mountains. Emma had fallen asleep with her head resting in Naomi's lap. Eli reached over and quietly took Naomi's hand. No one hurried the moment. The wind moved gently through the cedars. A meadowlark called from the fence line. After a long while, Eli looked toward the valley they had crossed together months before. "Home isn't where we arrived," Naomi smiled, her fingers tightening around his. "It's where we chose each other." He finished the thought. Every single day. The last light faded from the mountains. Behind them stood the cabin that had once sheltered a stranger. Ahead of them stretched a future they had built one quiet choice at a time. And maybe that's where this story truly begins. Take a moment and imagine yourself standing on that porch as the sun slips behind the Bighorn Mountains. The cold seasons are behind you. The people who once judged you no longer matter. Beside you is someone who stayed, not because life was easy, but because they chose you again and again. Wouldn't that change the way you looked at tomorrow? Naomi didn't find happiness because the world suddenly became kinder. She found it because one act of compassion opened the door to another, and little by little, fear gave way to trust. Eli didn't heal by forgetting the past. He healed by making room for someone new. Sometimes love isn't a promise spoken beneath bright lights. Sometimes it's a warm coat on a winter night, a hand that doesn't let go, or a quiet voice saying, "I'm here." If this story touched your heart, I'd love to know which moment stayed with you the longest. Share it in the comments, because someone reading your words may need that same hope today. And if stories like this remind you that second chances are still possible, I hope you'll join us again. There are many more journeys waiting just beyond the next trail. Stories of courage, healing, quiet mysteries, and hearts finding their way home when they least expect it. Until then, take care of the people who make your world feel like home.